Alright guys, M-Tech Guy here. Now it's a bit of a cold old damp frosty morning here right now, but that's okay because we're going to be working on the E46 M-Tech 1 this morning. We're going to continue on with the repairs and maintenance. Now if you saw in the previous video, we've got a few bits and pieces done, so we're going to continue with that theme in this video. Now this is my daily driver right now and it feels so good to be back in an E46. They're such a great car. I have daily driven them in the past, and this one has been particularly well looked after previously in its life, so I want to keep on top of things. Now we are running this car on a tight budget, doing all the repairs myself as usual, and being very cautious about what we're spending on parts. So we're not spending any money unnecessarily, only what's needed, but at the same time we're going to look after the car properly. Right, so let's get into it. Right, now first things first, we're going to be giving this car an oil change, and yes, I know, in the previous videos I said I was going to defer this for a little while. Now the oil change intervals on the E46s with the M54 engine are 25,000 kilometers, which is way too stretched out for my liking. Now what I've done previously with vehicles that I've owned with the M54 engine is I've done an oil change every 12,500 kilometers, so that's one in between every recommended oil change. And what I normally do is just reset the counter when it gets to 0 and it's showing 25,000 kilometers to go. When it gets to 12,500, I'll do an oil change without resetting the timer. I just know in my own head that's the oil change intervals that I've always stuck to. I've had a good luck with them. Now when I purchased this vehicle, there was a bit of time left on that timer, and I was going to leave it till it got to 12,500 kilometers left to go. But it did feel like I was going against the grain a bit, because what I always like to do whenever I buy a car, one of the first things I like to do is give it a fresh oil change, just so I know exactly what oil's in the vehicle then. There's no uncertainty and I know it's nice and fresh moving forward. It gives me a good baseline to go on. But obviously we're trying to save as much money as we can with this car. We're running it on a tight budget, so I was going to leave that for the time being. But the oil that I like to use in the M54 engines, the Castrol Edge 5W30, this came up on special at my local auto parts store. So normally they're $125 a bottle. Right now they were $55 each. So rather than wait and pay full price, I got these for a much cheaper price. I've saved myself a lot of money there. And now I've got the oil, I am going to carry out the oil change. And luckily I also had an oil filter kicking around from the old X5. I was planning to give it an oil change before I lost the car, so still had this one remaining. Man filter, OEM filter, and it hasn't cost me anything this time round. So I'm going to carry out the oil change today rather than waiting, just because I'm going to feel much better knowing that there's some fresh oil in there and I know exactly what type of oil it is. And the other reason is I've got a lot on my plate right now. I'm going to be selling my house in the near future, so there might be a stage where a lot of my tools might be in storage, or it might not be easily accessible to get the car jacked up and perform an oil change. And I think that time's going to fall around about the time that the oil change is going to be due by my schedule. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get it done today, and that buys me some time to sort all my other nonsense out. And I know that this car's got some fresh oil in it. So we're doing this on the cheap, but we're doing it properly. We're looking after the car properly. Right, let's get the front of the car jacked up. Let's get into it. Now then, before we jack up the front end of the car and get stuck into the oil change, there's just one other thing I wanted to check here. Now I've just been for a rip round the block just to get the engine all warmed up so it'll drain nicely. Now the one thing that's really concerned me since I bought this car, the one thing that's really stood out, is the fact that the temperature gauge for the coolant, the needle just sits past halfway. Now every other E46 I've owned in the past, the needle's always sat bang on in the middle. And if you've learned anything over the past few years about E46s, the one thing that will destroy one of these engines is if the cooling system goes sideways. And it's not unusual for the expansion tanks to give out and the thermostats, this type of thing, you know. Now, I did mention this in a previous video when we gave the vehicle a good check over when I initially purchased the E46, and I was sort of half planning to put a thermostat in it in the near future and a couple of radiator hoses, but I just would like to be certain about what's going on here before I do anything with the cooling system. Now, as nice as it would be just to go, yeah, just put a new cooling system in there, water pump, thermostat, expansion tank, which I normally would advise, with this car I'm trying not to spend money unnecessarily, so if everything's looking good, I don't just want to carpet bomb the whole cooling system, you know. So I want to see if I can see exactly what's going on with this temperature gauge. I suspect it might be the thermostat just getting towards the end of its life, starting to get age, starting to soft fail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect up my scan tool and we can see exactly what temperature the cooling system's running at. Now if I remember rightly, the thermostat opens at 98 degrees C. So if it's hovering around that temperature, then I'll be happy with that. But it is hard to tell with the gauge because they are heavily buffered on these cars. So what does that mean? Well, it's got quite a bit of a tolerance where it'll keep the needle steady even if the temperature's fluctuating quite a bit. So even when it is starting to get quite hot, if it's getting over temperature, the needle won't always move to the right hand side for quite some time until it's getting really hot. So this is a bit of a concern that it's sitting just to the right hand side of the center line there. It might be alright, but I think it's worth checking out. Let's get the scan tool plugged in and see what's going on. Now the scan tool I'm going to be using is the good old trusty Creator C310. Now I do have the Swaben scan tool, and as much as I love that scan tool, it's such an awesome scan tool. The thing takes like 10 years to load at each stage. I haven't got time for that nonsense today, so we're just going to do it quick and easy with this one. This is a great little scan tool for the E46 anyhow. So let's take a look. It's got engine operating data. So there we go, the coolant temperature is 89 degrees C. Bearing in mind the car is stationary right now and the fans aren't running. So there we go, the actual operating temperature, looking at it accurately with the scan tool, was 89-90 degrees C. So I'm happy with that, with a thermostat that opens at 98 degrees C. That's looking good to me. So obviously this gauge, maybe it's a little bit off, but the one thing that I have noticed, take a look at it there, you can see it's just sitting to the right hand side of the center line there. Now if I turn the engine off, you can see that the gauge needle in its relaxed state does sit just a couple of millimeters just to the right hand side of the 0 point of the gauge there. So maybe it's just the needle that's a tiny bit off, but the figures are looking good, so I'm not going to worry too much about that one now. So if we take a look under here, we've got a little access hatch here where our drain plug's hiding behind. So we'll just unloosen the flap. Takes a number 2 Phillips. And 16mm for the drain plug. So that certainly came out with a fair old spurt of a stream. So had a bit of a mess to clean up there, even got a bit of oil all over my camera, but there we go, even with a massive drain pan like this, still managed to overshoot the mark. And while that's draining down the bottom and doing its thing, we'll release the filler cap to let it drain a bit easier. We'll remove the old oil filter. Your crush washer for the drain plug. Let's have a look. See what oil filter was used previously. Just about make out the BMW logo on this, so it's a genuine filter by the looks of it. Nice. Reinstall the new filter. Reinstall the drain plug. Put the access hatch back in place. This stuff certainly flows a lot nicer than the old 10W60 in the M5, that's for sure. Right, I think what we'll do next, before we lower this down back on its front wheels, I think I'll jack up the rear of the car and get the differential fluid changed out. I've got no idea if it's been done or when it was last done, what the condition of the fluid is. It might even be the original fluid still in the differential. So because it's a bit of an unknown, we're going to get it changed out today, get some fresh fluid in there. So let's take a look at what fluid we're going to be using in the differential today. Right, so the differential fluid that we're going to be using today is the Castrol Syntrax 75W90. Now, I've always used this in my E46s in the past. It's a good fluid. It's fully synthetic. You don't necessarily have to get the Castrol brand, just as long as it's a fully synthetic 75W90 that's GL5, it'll be absolutely fine. So if I remember rightly, it takes about 1.1 litres, so I've got 2 litres there. There's more than enough. Now, in addition to the differential fluid, we're also going to need some way of sealing the drain plug and the fill plug. Now, originally, these cars came with just a little crush washer there, and the later ones came with the drain and fill plugs like these ones with the little O-ring on there. So if you're going to use the later type, you need to remove the old style there, and then this incorporates the O-ring. There's a wee groove in it, but if you are using the one with the crush washer, then you need to use this with the old style fill plug that isn't grooved for an O-ring. Now, as it happens, I had this fluid left over. It's brand new. I bought it especially for my E53 X5 at the time. I was planning to do the front and rear differential oil changes, but I lost the car before I got round to doing it, and I did actually have 4 of these plugs, 2 for the front diff, 2 for the rear diff. So obviously the E46 has only got a rear diff. Now, I'm assuming this still has the original drain and fill plugs. I would have liked to have used just the original crush washers, but I only have one just left over from a previous job, just the way it's worked out. So today we're going to use the 2 newer style with the O-rings. So this is great because it hasn't actually cost me a penny for the drain and fill plug or the fluid. Well, it did cost me a penny, but this was ages ago, but I've since lost the E53. So I haven't had to go out just now and spend the money on this, which is great because I don't have any money and we're running this thing on a budget. So we're going to get the differential fluid changed out in the E46 for free today. Alright, so now that we've got the E46 up in the air, it's sitting nice and level. Next, we can drain out that old differential fluid and we'll see what it's looking like. Right, now I suppose we better make sure we can get the fill plug undone before we go draining all the fluid out of it. That's all right. Oh, look at that, that doesn't actually look that bad. Take the fill plug out, let it flow out a bit nicer. I'm not sure how old that is, but it certainly looks reasonably clear. Right, that'll do. We'll install the new drain plug. There we go, now we're ready to fill her up. These bottles have the wee spout on the top, so it makes getting the new fluid in there a lot easier. Right, get another bottle. There we go, correct differential fluid level has been achieved. Install the new fill plug. And there we go. That's what the old fluid looked like. It's reasonably clear when it was draining, but it is looking a bit old and dirty there, and there is quite a bit of glitter in it too. I'm not sure if you can make it out just on the camera there, but in the bottom of the drain pan there was a bit of glitter, a bit of wear material, so good to get that changed out and some fresh fluid in there. So now I've got the car back down on all four wheels, it's sitting nice and level. So next up, we can now finish this oil service by checking the level and make sure it's all correct. That just wants a wee top up. Perfect. Right, so the next job I'm going to have a look at today is the windscreen washer reservoir. Now, depending on what screen wash the previous owners have been using, what can happen over time is that screen wash, if it's a cheaper version, can start to gellify in the bottom of the reservoir there, and what will happen is it'll end up in the pump and it'll block the strainer, and then eventually the pump will stop working and you won't have any screen wash spraying on your windscreen there. So it's usually them cheaper brands that you buy from the supermarket or the gas station. Now, this pump has been replaced not that long ago at the main dealer, so I want to look after it. I'm not sure what liquid's in there at the minute. Now, I've been to my local dealer and picked up some genuine BMW screen wash. This is what I'd recommend using in your BMW reservoir. Because like I say, the cheaper stuff can just cause problems, and this stuff's pretty cheap from the dealer anyhow. Now, finally, my local dealer has been able to source the screen wash with the antifreeze in it, which is pretty rare over here in New Zealand. So it's middle of winter right now, and it's not unusual for us to have 0-degree mornings where the car's all frosted over. So what I'm going to do is remove the windscreen washer reservoir, tip out the old liquid, flush it out with the hose pipe, and then refill it with water and this stuff, and then that should extend the life of the pump. So we'll start off by disconnecting the connector to the pump. Unclip the shroud. Got a 10mm bolt at the top here. I'm going to remove the hose off the pump here. There'll be a bit of liquid that'll come out, and then we'll lift the whole reservoir out. And as we lift it out, there's the level sensor here to Just turn 90 degrees and slide out. Now I've also removed the pump from the reservoir, which has the strainer attached there, which is removable. So I'll give this a good flush out as well, even though it doesn't look too bad. We'll give the whole lot a good flush. And look at that, it's so easy accessible to get at this windscreen washer reservoir, unlike the E47 1 series that I owned previous, where it's buried right down in the inner wing. Even the M5 is buried right down in the wheel arch there. So yeah, the E46 is definitely way more user-friendly when you're working on it yourself. One bolt, one hose, one connector, lift it straight out. Just seems too easy compared to how they're building them nowadays. Right, I think that'll do for today. Alright guys, so there we have it. That's a few more little jobs taken care of on the BMW e46 330ci M-Tech 1. There will be some more videos to follow where we're going to continue with the repairs and maintenance with spending as little money as we can get away with. We'll have some more E60 M5 videos in the future to come also. Now if you found this video interesting or useful, don't forget to give it a like and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more BMW DIY content. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm M-Tech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.